Hi, I'm David Mandell from the OJM Group, and today we're going to be discussing reducing physician financial stress, best practices in financial efficiency for physicians in private practice and also those employed. Now, I wouldn't be a good attorney if I didn't start this talk with a couple of disclaimer slides. As you can see, there's a couple pages here, but essentially what you need to know is this isn't legal or tax advice. And of course, it's the beginning of an education process. Hopefully you hear some ideas today that get you interested in learning more. We'll talk about that in a second. But also that you eventually, if you want to implement anything you hear today, meet with somebody who's a professional in the field, whether it be an attorney, a CPA, a financial professional, depending on the topics that I speak about. Now, I mentioned continuing education. We've had a great relationship with AEI over the years, and I want to make sure you understand an offer that you can take advantage of that we've been doing with AEI since the beginning of my talks. We've been writing books, I've been writing books specifically for physicians for 20 years. It's hard to believe that, but it's true, since the mid and late 1990s. And you can see on the screen a number of different books that we have. We have our For Doctors Only book, which is kind of a national flagship book for any physician of any specialty in any state. Then we've actually done some books specifically in states with attorneys in that state, and even a couple with clients of ours in particular specialties. And as a viewer at AEI, as someone watching this, you can get any of these for free. So I'll tell you at the end how we can do that, and you'll have some materials in your written materials that describe it. But I encourage you to get these because anything I'm talking about today, I'm just going through very quickly to give a good broad overview in the course today. But as physicians generally like to do, you want to read more, you want to learn more, these books will help you do that. And whether they're a hard copy or a Kindle or iPad version, you can get them all for free, and I encourage you to do so. So today, what are we going to talk about? One, we're going to address the background of physician financial stress. It's an important issue. I think it keeps a lot of physicians from being the best doctor they can vis-a-vis their patients because they're concerned about retirement or their financial future, and the data back that up, as we'll see. We're going to talk about 3 ways to become more financially efficient, which ideally relieves some of that stress and allows you to be, frankly, a better doctor by not worrying so much about these financial issues. We're going to look at benefit planning. We're going to look at a particular topic for private practices, captive insurance companies, of which there have been a very interesting new law passed since last year's talk. And we're going to talk about efficiency in retirement planning and how your assets can actually work for you, which is, I think, a big stress reliever if you can do that efficiently. So, physician financial stress. Let's talk about that and what the data shows. The first slide, we'll talk about a study that dealt with 2,000 physicians a number of years ago, polling them on a whole bunch of questions related to stress and happiness in practice, et cetera. And what you'll see is that 87% of physicians said they were moderately or severely stressed on a day-to-day basis. Again, from my family members, my brother still practicing, my father part-time, and 1,000 physician clients, I can say that's probably true. I had a call with a physician late at night last night about a particular issue. 63% said they were more stressed than they were 3 years ago. That trend is not a positive one. We hope to, by talks like this and more education and maybe some changes to the healthcare delivery system, maybe reduce that over time. And the top 3 things that they said that they felt would help them, number 3 was improved finances, compensation or reimbursement. 29%, almost a third, felt that these financial issues, if they were improved, could reduce their stress level. And ideally, if you're less stressed, you're doing a better job with your patients. So that's the context in which we're going to, really talk the rest of this hour about ways we can do that. The second study is similar, and it has about 4,000 participants, done by the AMA, a division of the AMA. And this was more specifically on financial issues. And what they found, not surprisingly, is the number one goal of physicians, or the number one financial goal, is to have a comfortable retirement for them or their spouse or partner. Not surprising. That's really probably the number one financial goal of most Americans. Half of physicians said they were behind where they'd like to be, and only 6% said they were ahead of where they wanted to be. So, really that means to me that 94% of physicians really would benefit from planning that would improve their financial picture and give them the comfort and reduce their stress level to say that they're better on a better path, or at least they can see themselves on a better path towards that number one goal, retirement. And of course, along with that, not surprisingly, was data that showed that physicians needed a lot more education in these areas. Hence this kind of talk with the AEI, that if doctors can know more about what their options are, can plan better, can spend a little more time on their career, not just in it, seeing patients every day, that they probably would make better decisions, which would lead them to their goals easier and perhaps quicker, and of course then reduce stress and I think make them better physicians. So let's begin with benefit planning. This is an area that both employed physicians and those with their own private practice can take a significant benefit from if they do it right. All right, so there's a big difference, and we see this over clients' careers, of those who are really taking advantage of maximizing their benefit planning versus those that are not. Okay? Now, for most physicians, when they think of benefit planning, they think of a retirement plan. And when they think of retirement plan, they think of a qualified retirement plan. And that certainly is something we're going to spend a couple slides on, and it's something that probably all of you can take advantage of at your practice. Maybe not all, but most. But we see that with our clients as one bucket, one trough, one place you can put dollars, and there's some significant benefits, but some drawbacks, as we'll see, to that bucket. But it's something that many physicians have access to, and they probably should understand the pros and cons and decide if they want to maximize or want to hedge that in some way, as we'll talk about. Okay? In our view, tax diversification for our clients is the key. And many physicians have heard the term diversification before, but it's really in the context of investments. How much should be in large cap versus small cap versus bonds versus international. And that's something that's very important. We'll touch a little bit on that at the end. What I'm talking about is tax diversification. Where is your wealth tied up so that when you want to get to that goal, or as you plan for that important goal of retirement, what are the taxes going to be then? Well, none of us know what the rates will be 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. But we do know, based on today's law, that we can help clients put their assets in different places so that when they come out, they will likely be taxed in different areas and not just subject to the highest tax, which is ordinary income. So when we talk about tax diversification, this slide really gives you kind of a visual depiction of it, the buckets analogy. The qualified plan is your left bucket, your green bucket. These are assets, whether it's a 401k, a profit sharing plan, a pension plan, a 403b in many hospitals. You get a deduction for the dollars that go in, which is great. You get tax-free growth along the way, which is great. You generally get terrific asset protection. Okay, that was a subject of previous talks at AEI and maybe in the future. Creditor protection, lawsuit protection is very high for qualified plans. A little bit of variance between the states. So those are all good things. Okay. In the middle of the buckets is assets that are subject to future capital gains taxes. This would be real estate. It might be interest in a surgery center or even a medical practice if you sell it out. It might be other assets like business assets or artwork or valuable antiques, cars, et cetera. Almost any other asset that you own, when you sell it, you'll be subject to the capital gains tax, not just federal, state income tax, and maybe even the Medicare on top of that, about 30%. On the right bucket are the most advantageous assets for the future because they come out tax-free. That's the blue bucket. So that might be tax-free munis, that might be a Roth IRA, which many physicians have taken advantage of, where you don't get the deduction going in like you do on the left-handed green bucket, so the dollars going after tax, but they grow tax-free and then you can take them out tax-free. So again, that's a good diversification strategy. Life insurance, cash value life insurance as an asset class can also work this way. The assets can grow tax-free, and if managed properly, can come out tax-free. So each of these buckets have their pros and cons, costs and benefits. But when we think physicians think about that number one goal for retirement, they should also be thinking immediately about diversification. Where can I put dollars in different places so that in 20 years when I'm in retirement, maybe income taxes are really through the roof. I mean, if you look at the history of the income tax, we'll show that slide later, the 1950s, the highest rates were in the 90%. Okay? You wouldn't want to have all of your assets in a position that are going to subject to 90% income taxes in retirement. That's going to ruin your plan. Okay? So we want to make sure that we diversify because we don't know where taxes are going to be, capital gains, income, et cetera. So if our clients are better diversified, they have much less risk. And much less risk means, I think, a better feeling of security and less stress. So diving into the qualified plan bucket, that first left green bucket for a minute, let's do that. Overall qualified plans, there's two types. Okay, as I mentioned, the asset protection is excellent. And the two types are really defined contribution plans, where Congress says this is how much you can put in per year, and defined benefit plans, where we don't know how much you can put in without doing a calculation based on future benefits, and we use the IRS calculations back to figure out how much you can put in. Okay, so those are the two categories, and there are different ones underneath that. On all of them, though, you get a full deduction going in, which we all like. You get that tax-free growth, and they're subject to income taxes on the way out. Okay, and if you want to take dollars out before you're 59 and a half, don't ask me why that half is in there, but that's Congress, then you're going to pay a penalty in addition to the ordinary income taxes. They're also not a great asset to have left in your estate plan. The other, so the first category underneath the qualified plan subset, is defined contribution plans. As I mentioned, these, like they sound, the Congress defines how much you can put in every year. Okay, for 401ks, 403bs, 457 plans, which many physicians may have at hospitals, it's an $18,000 deferral amount. Okay, for a profit sharing plan, which many medical practices have, the annual max is $53,000. Okay, and that changes over time. So certainly something you want to check in with advisors on, because typically those are tied to grow over time. There's a lot of flexibility, which is a great element of this tool, meaning you don't have to put in the maximum. So some years your cash flow is tight, you put in less. Other years you maybe had a good year, you can put in more. That's a terrific thing. You can't be overfunded or underfunded. But still, proper plan design is a key, especially for those physicians who are watching who have their own practice. Because you want to maximize how much you put in vis-a-vis your employees. Okay? Turnover is important. We're not here to be cheap to the employees, because if you have good people, you want to keep them. Very clear the cost of turnover is a lot higher than a benefit plan. However, you also want to be in a smart ratio between what you're putting away for them, what they're contributing themselves, and what you can put away for yourself. I've had physicians come to me and say, listen, I don't even have a qualified plan anymore because it got too expensive for all my employees. It just wasn't worth it. And the key is there's two handfuls, dozens of formulas that you can use to get to where you want to be. It's not my expertise in my firm. There's other people who know that stuff really well. But you want to go through that process and test it every couple of years to say, am I still as maximized as I can be? Because maybe you can put away more than you're putting away, or maybe you could reduce your expenses and keep putting away the same amount. And if you haven't tested that in recent years, you should. The other subset of qualified plans are defined benefit plans. These where the government defines, you use the formulas based on how much how old you are and how much you can put away based on your income, and actuarially you calculate back how much you can put away. Now, we have physicians putting in over $200,000 a year away. Maybe they're older and they didn't save a lot. They came into their career later. Maybe they were in academic medicine or military, et cetera. And so they're able to make up a lot. And it makes a lot of sense in that circumstance. However, the two caveats here is if you have a lot of employees, it's going to be very expensive for them. Okay, so again, you got to run the numbers. And the second thing is you don't have the flexibility you have with the defined contribution plan. Once you put this plan in, you got to commit to it, because you can get penalties for underfunding it. So if you need to put X dollars away, maybe that's even a high number, which you like, to get to your retirement number with that actuarial calculation, you can't raise it, lower it, raise it, lower it every year, and make it based on your cash flow. So defined benefit plan can be very powerful, but it takes a lot of commitment. Now, SEP IRAs are not technically a qualified plan, but many physicians and smaller practices do use a SEP IRA. They're very similar in the rules to a defined contribution plan. The deduction up front, the tax-free growth, the taxable access on the way out. The contribution limits are parallel. The asset protection, though, is not the same. And there are some states where the asset protection is really poor compared to a qualified plan. So that's another factor to consider when you're kind of looking at what plan or what tool should I use in a small practice. Sometimes SEP IRAs make sense, sometimes they don't. Now, for all these plans, remember, deduction going in, tax-free growth, ordinary income on the way out. I use my father here as an example. I looked at his tax return from 1977 when he was a radiologist head of a department. He was at a 70% marginal tax bracket back then, 7-0, okay? On the federal side, not to mention Rhode Island state taxes. So when he was contributing to a profit-sharing plan at that radiology practice, he was getting a deduction against 70% income, marginal income. That's terrific. Now he lives in Florida, no state income tax, so he pulls it out as a maximum of 39.6, right? That's a great leverage. The problem is we don't know the future income tax. And if you do know, please call me and we'd love to do some work together because that's an important number for me to know. But if you look at this slide, which shows you the history of the highest marginal rate of the US federal income tax over 100 years, and the chart ends at 2013 because there hasn't been a change since then. We are at the highest marginal rate at 39.6 today, but you can see that from a lot of the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, the rates were much higher. So the only point of this is there's certainly some risk to hedging all of your retirement on a tool that you're going to pay ordinary income tax in the future on. That's why tax diversification is so important, because we don't know the future of this chart, and we don't want to hedge our clients or even myself to having most of or all of my retirement assets in a qualified plan, which is going to be subject to future income taxes when they might go up significantly. At least that's what the history tells us. So what other asset classes do you have? You have asset classes that you can get capital gains treatment on, which again is most of your personal assets. You know, not your home, because you might have a capital gain exemption on that, but a second home, other real estate, a portfolio in your name. When you turn that into cash for retirement, you're going to pay capital gains taxes. Okay. Now, if we look at the capital gains tax rate chart, you can see that again, it's been much higher in the past than it is today. It's at basically a 20% if you have a certain threshold, plus state income taxes. So for people in New York and California, you're talking 30 to 35%, because you got to factor in the state's going to get paid too when you sell an asset, not just federal. So again, you know, capital gains tax has always been less than the ordinary income tax. So that's a good hedge by having some assets there, which most of you do. But it's also something that can go up in the future. It's certainly not historically at its low point, but it's also nowhere near its high point. So I think there is room for that to go up, especially on high income taxpayers over time. So again, it's one bucket, but it shouldn't all be hedged there. What about assets in that far right bucket in that initial slide, ones that come out tax-free? Roth IRAs, I mentioned cash value life insurance, certain non-qualified plans, tax-free munis. Again, do we put clients all of their assets in that? Absolutely not. But does it make sense to hedge some of the others from a tax point of view to reduce that stress, to reduce the worry about where a tax rate's going to go? Absolutely. And I think a lot of physicians have kind of clued in on that over time, because I see more and more doctors that I'm talking to using Roth IRAs. So they're willing to bite the bullet and pay some tax up front on that, because they know they're done with taxes on that money. It's going to grow tax-free, and they're going to pull it out tax-free. And it's the exact same with these other asset classes. They just have to make sense economically in the portfolio. Non-qualified plan is one I mentioned here, and it's a great type of plan for physicians in a private practice. You may, as a hospitalist or someone employed at a large group, have the option to participate in a non-qualified plan. A couple of factors on non-qualified plans. One, there's no limit on contributions, okay? It's based on your reasonable compensation. So the numbers I mentioned before with qualified plans, you know, $53,000 as a max for a defined contribution plan, et cetera, doesn't apply. This can also be done in addition to whatever qualified plan you've got, 401k, defined benefit plan, profit sharing plan. Non-qualified plan, totally different scenario, can do in addition, okay? We have both at my firm. Employee participation is not required. That's probably the most important thing, especially for those of you in private practice. You can do this plan just for you. You can do this plan just for a couple of physicians. If out of 3 or 4 docs, only one wants to participate, that's fine too, okay? All of that is allowed in the non-qualified plan area, okay? You can have a discriminatory plan. It is allowed, not allowed in qualified plans, is allowed in non-qualified plans. And it's an ideal hedge, okay? Why? Because you don't get that tax deduction up front, but you get tax-free growth, and if managed properly, tax-free access in the future, okay? Like the Roth IRA. So it can be kind of like an unlimited Roth, you can think of it that way, and it's an ideal hedge for many of you looking to do something to diversify your tax portfolio. So let's look at one case study. Real client of ours, 45-year-old physician in Ohio. We're going to assume $100,000 here for 10 years. You don't have to do that much. You could do more, depends, okay? But it makes the numbers easy. So $100,000 a year they're going to contribute for 10 years. That's $1 million over 10 years. We assume a 6.5% growth rate. We assume a 1% management fee. If they didn't do this plan, they'd pay someone like our firm or others to manage those assets. And we assume a mix of tax rates that you can see here. And what we wanted to show the client, as I want to see before I did this, is what does it look like doing it versus not doing it, right? With the same assumptions, apples to apples. So what you can see here in the slide is on the left side is your after-tax investment. So if that client paid the tax every year on that $100,000 based on their tax rate, gave it to a firm like ours to manage the money, we charged 1%, they grew it at 6.5%, and then they waited from, they'd been contributing 45 to 55, and then they'd wait till 65 to 85 to take dollars out, okay? What they would basically take out over that 20 years is about $2.2 million, which is a great income over that time, and it shows the power of saving, okay, and getting a good return on that. But if you look at the right column, here's taking the same $100,000, but instead of just paying tax and giving it to an investment advisor, it's actually putting it into this non-qualified plan where you get tax-free growth and tax-free access. See, on the left side with the after-tax investment, you're going to accumulate some taxes along the way, and then when you need it in cash in retirement, you're going to pay the capital gains taxes. Okay? So on the right side, you're not going to pay that kind of tax, and you can see it's an increase of about $1.5 million. So a significant increase. The raw dollars amount of about $1.5 million of after-tax dollars, how much more would you need in your qualified plan? It's probably 2.5. Okay? Because remember, that difference in $1.5 million over that 20 years is after-tax dollars. So very significant. And the reason is for that difference is this slide. It's really taxes. We're assuming the same 6.5%, okay? The difference is if you look at the difference in expenses, and this funds into this non-qualified plan funds into a cash value life insurance policy as many non-qualified plans do. That's why you see the policy expenses. So on the non-qualified plan, you see all the expenses over that 20 years, $348,000 on the left column, and then on the right column. And on the left column, you see the after-tax investment expenses. So fees from a management company like ours, but mostly taxes. And there's a huge difference there. And that makes up much of the difference between the two retirement scenarios is taxes. So if you can use a plan that grows tax-free and comes out tax-free and get similar or the same rates of return, it kind of makes sense intuitively, you're going to have a lot more dollars. So again, I could spend lots of time just on this one tool, happy to chat with any of you individually about it, but it is something that if you're thinking about retirement, you're concerned about that, and you recognize the importance of tax diversification, this is something that could make sense in many private practices. So, conclusion on the benefit plans, understand your qualified plan options, whether you're employed or in private practice. Make sure it's maximized. If you are, make sure you're using the right formulas. Understand that personally held assets like securities and other real estate, et cetera, is going to be subject to capital gains taxes. So it's better than ordinary income, typically, or has been over our history of our tax code, but it's not totally diversified away. Look at asset classes that have no tax on the way out, and see if some of those things, maybe like a non-qualified plan or some of these other asset classes, may make sense for you. Now let's look at another topic that is really specific to physicians in private practice, but I wanted to make sure we covered it because there's actually been a very interesting new law just passed since last year that I wanted to make folks aware about, and that is the captive insurance company tool. Now, captive insurance companies, small captives, under this code section you can see at the bottom, 831B, been around for 30 years. 1986 is when that statute came through. We'll talk in the next slide about the new change that Congress and President Obama passed. But it's always been probably the #1 tool that I've seen out there for financial efficiency in the right circumstances for a privately held medical practice. It can provide risk management benefits for presently uninsured risks. So you might have malpractice insurance, but you might not have insurance against a HIPAA claim. You might not have insurance against a claim from an employee, a harassment or wrongful termination claim. You can provide all of those through your captive, okay? It can come in and cover your excess amount. So if you have 1.3 coverage for your malpractice, maybe you want 2.6, your captive could do that. It can fill in the gaps of your deductibles and other policies, just be a litigation expense policy, no liability payout to any plaintiff. And if you practice well, you can keep the profit. So if it's there, if you need it, and if you don't need it, well, you're the owners of the captive, and so you're going to reap all that profit in the future. It then can tie into your retirement planning, which again, #1 goal of physicians. So this can be a significant retirement wealth creator, as well as an asset protector and risk management tool over time. And one of the drivers of that, not only the insurance, is its tax benefit. So 831B has been in the code since 1986, and we have a new statute, which I'll just talk about now, that goes into effect January 1, 2017. Up until this year, or up until December of 15, technically, 831B said that if you have a small captive that's insured in your practice, and in my next slide I'll show you a good diagram, you could, the captive could write up to $1.2 million of premium per year, and it's not taxed on that premium income. So there aren't many opportunities in our tax code for you to own a company as a physician and have it be profitable, and you pay no tax on it. It's not a loophole, it's not getting around anything, it's not going offshore, it's right in the tax code. Up to $1.2 million of profit from an 831B company has been tax exempt for 30 years. And what the new statute says, that came in December 15, this tax extenders bill, it goes into effect January 17, so still now as I'm speaking in 2016, that 1.2 limit applies. But as soon as the clock strikes 2017, that limit goes from 1.2 million to 2.2 million. So that's a pretty significant benefit, and we've kind of been waiting that for a long time because the 1.2 has been sitting there for 30 years without any adjustment for inflation. So that's a terrific opportunity for practices that maybe didn't see it in the past to say, hey, let's revisit this today, or those who have it to say, are there any other risks we can get up higher on our premiums because we're allowed to do that now. Okay? Now, while they giveth, they also taketh away. So there were some things in that statute that impact who can own a captive. It used to be you could also layer into, along with all the benefits I just explained, an estate planning element, meaning you could have the captive owned by a trust for beneficiaries, heirs, spouses, et cetera, not owned by yourself. So there's a great way to just do a lot of estate planning that, as a lawyer, I get interested in, and I'm sure it would bore you. But a terrific estate planning tool. Well, when they gave the new statute that increased the limit, they also said, no more of that estate planning. So my clients who've done this in the past, they've gotten many years of benefit of it, but the new captives after 2017 can't have that element anymore, but now they have a better income tax potential by raising the ceiling on the tax exempt amount. Now, this slide gives you a good visual depiction of what's going on. You have your practice, you have your owners, maybe one owner, maybe a group of owners. You have your captive, same owners, can't be different now, okay? Technically within 2%, don't want to get too technical, but it used to be, again, that group of owners under the captive, under the CIC, could be trusts and heirs and all that, can't do that anymore. But again, as I mentioned, now that new law says up to $2.2 million a year, not just 1.2. Now, for many of my practices, they're not even at the 1.2 level. They can't justify it risk-wise, and it has to be real insurance. It has to have real risk. We'll talk about that in the next slide. But for those larger practices that potentially could benefit from this, and this is a big increase, and it's something that people should be aware of. Now, what type of policies, I always get this question, should or does a captive typically write when involved in the medical space? Well, you'd be surprised. You could brainstorm and think about all the risks that a medical practice has, and it could include surgery centers, it could include ancillaries like physical therapy, it could include real estate, whatever the practice and the physician's own could be insured by this captive. So you could have everything from slip and fall coverage to, like I said, HIPAA or loss of information, losing a key contract, an economic type risk, or physician to a competitor. It could be a violation of a state code or loss of license, and not only liability, but the defense costs for that, okay? It could be a slip and fall or some kind of environmental claim with real estate. It could be claims because of employees, maybe not only employees suing the practice, but something an employee does to a patient or somebody else, and there's liability for the practice. So, you know, one of the things, as we'll talk about in the next slide, that the actuaries and the law firms that do this all the time are very good at is finding risk and justifying it and making it cost effective. Anything you kind of think of as a Lloyd's risk, a Lloyd's of London, hey, this is kind of a specialty risk or something that I haven't thought of. And then the other thing is, it's to look at what insurances you have now and fill in the gaps in deductibles. I mean, a lot of physicians have 1-3 coverage on their malpractice. Some have even less than that. When it might make sense to have more than that, but you really don't want to be paying out to a third party and saying, God, I'm paying all this premium. Do I really need that kind of coverage? It's a totally different mindset when you're paying it to your own captive and say, hey, if I need it, it's there. And if I don't, well, look at the game plan to take this out as a retirement asset. The most important thing, if you're considering putting in place a small captive at a practice, are the key roles, the key people involved. Because as I mentioned the new statute, as I mentioned the old statute, which has been there since 1986, and if I tell you that there are thousands of these operating, for lots of different types of businesses across the country, I can also tell you that there's abuse out there. So the IRS is very sensitive to folks who put a company together, just call it an insurance company and write a bunch of policies for the tax benefits, but they're not actuarially sound. The policies aren't legally sound. There's been never any claims, so it's all kind of hypothetical. You want to work with the folks who have been doing it, and if their clients have gotten audited, they've had successful audits, meaning no change, get all the benefits that they had claimed. And the key people for that are the law firm, the insurance manager, and the actuarial firm, okay? And my firm doesn't do any of those. I have been at law firms in the past where we've done that, but I think I have a pretty good idea who's out there in the marketplace who is conservative, but also willing to work with the clients and understanding how physicians and medical practices have that kind of experience to understand what probably makes sense there and what doesn't. The law firm is obviously going to draft all the documents and draft the insurance policies and create the entity. And if you have partners, create a shareholder agreement or a game plan or in the documents that lay out what happens when one person wants to leave and someone else comes in and wants to buy in, et cetera. The insurance manager is probably the most important on a day-to-day basis or month-to-month basis because they're the ones who are running the company for you and need to be licensed in the state. Now, when I started doing these 20, 30 years ago, a lot of them were done offshore. But one of the great things about the last 15 years or so is that a lot of states have said, hey, we want this kind of business. So you've got states like Kentucky and Delaware and Hawaii, Utah, I think Texas, a lot, probably a dozen states now have good small captive statutes where you don't have to go offshore anymore, okay? And why that's important is if you have an insurance manager that's licensed in the state where you're setting up your captive, and it doesn't have to be in the state that you practice, meaning you could have a doctor in California with a captive in Kentucky, that's no problem. you have to have a Kentucky licensed manager. They're going to understand what the Department of Insurance in Kentucky wants to see, from an annual audit to a business plan to the financial management and all of that. So those are all crucial. And the other thing that's crucial is the actuarial firm, because, hey, listen, I can say a premium for a policy to my company is $100,000, but the IRS might come in and say, no, that's not reasonable. That premium should only be $10,000. Okay? Now you've deducted that 100 and you haven't paid tax on the other end, so there's a tax consequence. So having a good actuarial firm whose work has been seen by the IRS, whose work has gone through audits and has been conservative, is also a crucial part of the plan. The third piece, or I'd say fourth piece of a successful captive is the financial management. You can do all these things right from a legal and tax point of view, but if you're not managing the assets properly, the Department of Insurance Department of Insurance in the state can come in and disregard or not renew your license, and that's not going to look good to the IRS. So, at our firm, we handle the investments for many captives and exit strategies, and that's certainly an important part. I don't want to denigrate what we do, but you got to get the first part right, which is the legal, tax, and actuarial. And if you do that, under this new statute, you can have tremendous benefits today and long-term for the private practice. So conclusion on the small captives, do you have a practice that's 3 to 5 million or more in revenue? If you do, you might be a candidate. Certainly the larger group practices where, 10, 20, 30, 40 million dollars of revenue, which you see in a lot of the large practices, especially over the last couple of years where there's been more consolidation because of the ACO rules. Those who haven't looked at a captive really should, because it can be a tremendous profit center. It can be a tremendous part of the wealth management of the physician owners for the future. In fact, I kind of analogize it to owning a building. Maybe a lot of small practices can't do that, but certainly large groups end up owning the real estate because they see that as an asset. Why pay rent forever? It's kind of the same thing. Why pay out all this insurance premium completely to outside parties? Why not try to capture some of it in a captive where you can take the benefit of that every year and in retirement? Final topic to talk about is financial efficiency for retirement. And this is something, of course, that is applicable to physicians in any type of environment, whether in government, whether in academic medicine, whether employed by a large hospital, health system, large group, solo practitioner, anything in between. As we revisit what the data showed us at the beginning, retirement is the number one goal for physicians, and getting there creates a lot of stress because, again, according to the data, 94% of the docs out there don't feel like they're ahead of schedule, okay? And many of them are really feeling behind the schedule and sort of under the gun. So if we can spend a little bit of time talking about how to think about retirement and think about the assets that are going to get you there, I think it's probably a valuable thing. And you'll see some interesting data in the next couple of slides. The good news, which I don't know if it's really good news or not, is that physicians are not alone. If we look at this slide, we'll see that most Americans are not saving enough. And what this slide shows us, this is essentially the personal quarterly retirement savings rate from 1947 to 2014. So you can see that it's been on a real decline since the 1970s, okay? Really a straight line almost from the mid-70s down to 2008, 2009. Maybe a lot of reasons for this, but essentially it seems like Americans were more motivated to save, and maybe it was also because the large corporations were doing it for them in pensions, which you don't see much anymore. But in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, saw a much higher savings rate, and it started to decline in the 70s and kept going all the way to the 80s, as you can see kind of in 90s, and sort of hitting a bottom in 2007, 2008. I guess one of the silver linings of the financial crisis of 2007, 2008 is a lot of people realize, hey, I haven't been saving enough because my balances just went down 40, 50%. So you could see a spike then in 9 and 10 of people getting back to, hey, maybe I shouldn't spend as much. Maybe I should be a little more fiscally conservative and save more. So that was a positive, but now we see it coming down. It's not as low as it has been, but we do see that, at least through 14, and perhaps if we look at this on my next year's talk, we'll see if it continues to fall or whether we get a little bit of a spike there. So physicians, are a microcosm of the larger picture, which is Americans not saving as much as they should be. Okay. Now again, it's very individualized. Some clients I have are terrific savers, and then I have other who are spenders. Even if their income is high, they spend, every time their income goes up, they spend more, right? And that's one of the things we try to tell our young physicians is, sure, go out and have nice dinner, maybe buy yourself something nice when you go from fellowship and finally making your first dollars, significant dollars as a physician in practice, but just don't go out and buy the expensive car. Don't do things that you're going to regret in the future just because you have some higher income. Because if you get in that mindset, then every year as your income improves as a partner or whatever the track is, you're going to continue to be in that situation. And I certainly have clients who have significant incomes who are terrible savers, and now they're at the point where they have to really look at themselves and make a change if they want to get to their goal of retirement at a certain age, at a certain lifestyle. So I think the lesson here that I really try to get physicians to absorb and buy into, and I think it relates directly to that initial discussion of stress and being a better physician, is to have your assets working for you as you work. I mean, every doctor who's watching this, I'm sure, feels they work hard. I mean, I don't know one physician who doesn't. I had a call with one at 9 o'clock last night, right? And that's okay if they're on a goal, they love what they do, they like what they're doing, they're helping patients, et cetera. It's certainly burnout is an issue, but that's a subject for another talk. But I think that's easier to take if you feel like you have a partner in getting yourself to retirement, to getting your financial goals, and your partner should be your assets. So while you're working a long day, your assets should be working for you. And that really comes into creating a plan to see where is it going to take me, and revisiting that plan every year or every quarter, and getting the confidence that I don't have to just do it alone by my work. I mean, one of the negatives of being a physician, even though they're well paid certainly in a lot of specialties, is you generally don't really make a lot of dollars when you're not working. Some people own surgery centers or real estate, et cetera, but for most physicians, like attorneys and others who are professions, you're basically paid as you're working. So you want to feel, and I think it's an important psychological element, that you've got your assets working for you as well, because I think if you do that, and you can see it in a real plan and a financial game plan, what we call a wealth plan, I think that reduces stress a lot, because you don't have to feel like you have to do it alone. Every dollar you save is now working for you for the future. And if we keep that concept in mind as we look at the next couple slides and the data there, I think it'll even be more powerful. Now, this slide is, again, a key one for the young docs, but really a motivator for all physicians. So what does this say? This shows the monthly savings you would need to accumulate $1 million by age 65, based on your age. And this assumes, this is done by Morningstar, obviously, this assumes a 7% rate of return, which, if you look at the history of the markets, is below, sort of stock markets over the last 80, 90 years, but a pretty, I think a decent return level. Certainly if you should put in 6, the numbers would be higher. If you put in 8, the numbers would be lower. We all know that, okay? But it's very significant. You can see visually, but if you dig into the numbers, for a 25-year-old, you're talking $381 per month to save. But if you're a 45-year-old, which a lot of physicians I have, you're up to almost $2,000 a year, per month. So, almost, 7 times difference by saving in your 20s versus your 40s. And certainly in the 50s, it blows up even higher. So, lesson here, I mean, it's not a genius. You don't have to be a genius like Einstein, who I think said one of the wonders of the world was compound interest. That's the story here. And so it's a motivator to say, if retirement is truly important to you, you need to dig down and say, hey, what am I spending? What am I saving? Because any dollar you can save today is going to be very powerful, no matter what age you're at, for the future. And the earlier you have that decision, the earlier you get disciplined about doing that and working with a professional to build something out, the better off you're going to be. So where are you going to invest the assets? If you want your assets working for you, where should they go? Okay, we talked a little bit about, from a tax point of view, the buckets, but then you got to fill the buckets. What goes in there, right? Well, we could do plenty of talks just on all the different assets and investments you can make. But here's a good slide from Morningstar that shows the Ibbotson sort of data from about 90 years, right? 1926 to 2014. So you got the Depression in there, you got a bunch of recessions, you got a lot of growth, and what you see is basically a lot of variability, a lot of volatility, but with a pretty steady upward-facing slope, right? And what you also see is that the dark blue is the top line is small caps. The lighter blue is large caps, meaning large capitalized stocks, so large companies like Fortune 500 versus smaller public companies in the dark blue, that these company stocks, equities, have outperformed not only inflation significantly, which is the gray bar at the bottom, but also bonds, which is the orange, and government securities like T-bills, et cetera, which is the green. So certainly, past performance is not a predictor of future results, it's not guaranteed future results, I should say. Whether it's a predictor or not, is what we're talking about. So for those of us in the financial world, basically look at this and say, in the past, over the last 90 plus years, having assets in the stocks and equities has outperformed the other asset classes. Does that mean our clients should be 100% in these asset classes with no hedge and no diversification? Absolutely not. But these are the most common asset classes, and these are the kind of things you should be considering with a professional to build that portfolio so your assets can work for you. So you don't feel like you're having, it's all on your shoulders from an income point of view to get yourself to retirement. Now this, I think, is my favorite slide of the ones we're doing today, because this shows a couple things. One is I would hope that it would discourage the do-it-yourselfers out there. I know there are physicians who like to do their own investments, and we have plenty of clients ourselves who do that, but they do that for part of the portfolio. They get professional advice on the general and maybe on a number, a certain percentage, and they do their things, their trading and the things they like to do individually. What this slide shows is the cost of missing the market, of the risk of coming in and coming out. And if all the data, and I could have other slides on this that show individual investors, whether it's me or a physician or accountant or lawyer, whatever it is, that we're subject to fear and greed. So fear, oh no, the market's going down, I better pull out. And greed, oh, the market's going up, I better get in. And there's data upon data upon data in our books that you can read about from different sources that show individual investors underperform not only the indexes, but the funds that they are investing in, because they pull out of the fund at the wrong time and they put back in the fund. So they just left it alone. They just put it in a box and didn't think about it. They'd outperform because they're the emotions, right? It's your money, it's your retirement, it's so important. So what this slide says really quantifies what is the cost of doing that. So this shows from 1995 to 2014, there were 5,040 trading days, okay, over that time period, 5,040. If you were in the index, and Morningstar in this slide shows a large cap index over that time, you'd perform about 9.9%, okay? That would be your return. Terrific, okay? Now I want to go to the third column there. If you miss just 20 days, the 20 top trading days out of 20 years, which is 1 day per year on average, okay? So you just said, oh my God, the market's falling, I can't take it, I got to get out. We get those calls from our clients, liquidate, go to cash, If you just did that one time per year, your return over those 20 years would fall from 9.9 to 3.6. That would ruin a financial plan or retirement plan. 9.9 to 3.6, that's basically almost a 300% drop in return by just missing 1 day per year, okay? And if you look at this chart, the scatter graph on the bottom, that graph, what you'll see is the big lines to the top, which are the highest trading days, the ones where you get the best gains, are typically surrounded by the lowest lines, the ones that go down the most. So what you see here is the perfect formula that if you're more than likely, if you're worried about the days that go down significantly and going to cash, you are very likely to miss some of those very significant up days. It's not like you get an up day all by itself. They're typically around the big low days, right? We can see that, the volatility. If it's down 400 points one day, it might come back 400 points the next day. And so this is a real cautionary tale to people who want to do it themselves, and very few of us can do it ourselves and regulate our own emotions when it's our own dollars at stake. That's why physicians are told not to diagnose and treat themselves. That's why there's a saying, a lawyer who has his own client is, a lawyer who represents himself has a fool as a client, right? You don't do these things yourself because you're too emotional, and the data shows that in investing very clearly. The other thing you need to do is get right advice. And again, I could spend a lot of time on this, but make sure you're working with a firm that has a fiduciary standard, which means they have the best interest of the client. And they're judged, and they can have liability if they don't put the best interest of the client in first. Now, you would think as a physician, of course I'm putting my patients first. But in the financial world, that has not been the standard across the board. There are a lot of firms who have. Our firm does voluntarily. We're part of that standard. But there's big hitters in our investment world who are not, and there's legislation now, and there's a big move to push them, drag them by their feet into that world. But they've been operating under a suitability standard, which doesn't mean your best interest is at heart. They just need to recommend something that's suitable for you, whether it was the best price or not, whether it was something they made money on because it was their proprietary product and didn't disclose it. All of those things can happen. With us, in a fiduciary standard, those things are not allowed. You want to work with a firm that has a transparent, client-aligned business model. If your financial person is trying to help you get to retirement, cannot tell you in one sentence how they make money working with you, then that should be a red flag, okay? Should be transparent, whether it's a fee under management or a commission. But if you start getting into commissions you don't quite understand, or you don't understand your financial statement, or you don't understand why you're in proprietary products of the company and not others, then that's a red flag, okay? You want to have expertise in communication, and the most important thing is you want the investments to be part of your overall plan to get you to your goal, whether that be retirement, part-time work, charity work, whatever it is. To reduce your financial stress, it's got to be part of that larger plan, as I mentioned. I use the example, is 5% a good return? Well, in a vacuum, some people would say that's terrible. I can get 10%. But you know what? For some of our clients, 5% is exactly what fits their plan to get them to their goals. Why would they take 10%, the risk that you need to take to 10%? Because remember, anytime you say, oh, I'm getting 10%, believe me, you're taking on a lot more risk than someone who's getting 5%. There's risk and reward, two sides of the same coin. So for some of our clients, 5% is a good return. For others, it doesn't match their plan. They have to have a little bit more risk in their portfolio, but they have a longer time horizon perhaps, and they're willing to do that. So don't be focused so much on returns. Focus on what it is to get you to your goals, to your retirement, so you can reduce your stress day to day as a physician and practice better. A minute about our firm, OJM Group. Pretty unique a firm, I think, because we have 3 different divisions. We have an asset management division, which lent me a bunch of these slides. So we manage $300 million or so for physicians across the country, with a fiduciary standard, with a transparent, very clear fee-based model for our clients. But we also have an insurance and benefits firm division, which can handle a lot of the things I talked about in terms of qualified, non-qualified plans. And then we have a consulting side that gets hired by physicians individually or practice to do some kind of evaluation, a diagnosis, if you will. And there's very few firms that kind of combine that consulting and fee-based diagnosis with also the services on the back end. We also have over 1,000 physician clients in 48 states. So we're very physicians focused, as you can see in the next slide about our books, which I'll conclude with in a second. The other thing about our firm I think that's pretty interesting is we can look at both the practice and personal planning. And if we are hired to do something around taxes, we can offer our firm commitment that says if we cannot save you at least 200% of our fee in terms of quantifiable savings, maybe that's benefit plan savings, as I mentioned, maybe that's tax savings. We can't achieve that for your practice, then we'll refund their fee. So that's pretty unique. What we call our firm commitment, haven't seen a lot of clients with that. And again, our goal in helping clients, really big picture, is to teach them about their options and to help them get to the goals they want to in a professional way, which ideally will help them reduce their stress and make them better physicians, make them better really people, family members, because they don't have this stress hanging over them all the time. So in terms of next steps, as I mentioned, this lecture, which I hope you got a lot out of, was meant to hit a number of different topics because we have a lot of different kinds of folks in the audience. But it's really there to get you thinking, to realize that there's more opportunities out there to be more financially efficient and reduce stress. But it's the beginning of an education process, and we partner with AEI to provide more education for you. So again, if you come to ojmgroup.com, you can get any of our books. There's a code, AEI is the code that you can use to get any of our books for free. Certainly you can contact me directly at my information on this slide, my email. You have a question, happy to do it. I know they hand out question cards as well. I answer those all year, so feel free to write those down and contact me. They'll get it to me and I'll answer the question. And I encourage you to get the books, whether hard copy, Kindle, or iPad. If you come to our website, we have plenty of free information. We do a free monthly webinar. We have a free monthly newsletter. Get more educated. It'll start to give you the confidence to make some changes, ideally, and improve your financial situation. So hopefully you've learned some things today. And I look forward to hearing from some of you. I hope many of you get the books, and perhaps you'll see me again next year as part of the AEI course. Thank you.